everybody. I'm Hannah Owens, the Insiders Club hostess. You might know me if you're an Insiders Club member. And I'm here today to share with you a very special clip that was recorded this last week in an Insiders Club gathering with Dr. Carol Swain and Dr. Christopher Schorr. You may know them from their fabulous book about critical race theory and how it is burning down the house. So go check out that book in that description box below. But before we get to that, I wanted to extend a special invitation to those of you that have not yet signed up to join our new Conservative Patriot Army. Dr. Stephen's special guests are joining virtually September 3rd and 4th with patriots and special guests all across the world as we help you lead your families and communities to freedom without having to sacrifice your beliefs, values, or your God-given rights. So if you haven't signed up for that yet, you're in luck, because this week we've extended our buy one, get one free sale for another few days. So go ahead and get your tickets, get a free ticket while you sign up, and be able to give it to a friend who's also a patriot. So also click that link down in the description to sign up and get your free ticket when you register today and learn a little bit more about that. But let's get into it. I'd love to show you this interview. Enjoy.
But yes, I'm not the only doctor in the house tonight. We've got several doctors. So this is great. That's right. Carol Swain is here. Professor Swain is an award-winning political scientist and former tenured professor at Princeton and Vanderbilt universities. And if her name sounds familiar, it's because I drop it probably at least once a week. Her book, The New White Nationalism in America, was an amazing read. If I recall, Professor Swain, you published that in 2002?
Yes, I did.
So you've been on the, you were into this ethno-nationalist wave before it was even a wave. I mean, you were cutting edge on this one.
And it was so controversial because I commissioned interviews of white nationalists and I actually allowed them to speak. And the thinking at the time was that I was giving them a platform and that we didn't need to listen to people like that. And I've always felt that what you don't know can hurt you, and it's important to listen to all sides. And so it was research that was considered, so it was welcomed by some people. They knew that there was a problem on the horizon, but others felt that I was giving them a platform they didn't deserve.
Yeah, you wrote that in the intro, if I recall, how important it was to you to make sure that we always have a dialogia, a dialogue between one, because if we start shutting down a debate, it's easy for it to fester in ways that open conversation can avoid. So,
well, Professor Cass Sunstein, who was at, I believe University of Chicago, where he argued that it was important to have a dialogue because the last thing you want is extremists talking of one another. They become more extreme. But if you have a conversation, it tends to moderate.
Right.
And we see that we have totally abandoned that concept, the whole idea. And what has happened is that the political left, it's gone off the deep end.
Right. Right. Yeah, it's a brilliant introduction. And I remember that. I remember that you brought that study into it, which was so good in terms of the importance of moderation, the importance of dialogue for moderation. It's so good. Christopher Schorr, PhD in American government from Georgetown University, his dissertation, White Nationalism and its challenge to the American right, considers factors that risk mainstreaming white nationalist politics in the United States, including critical race theory. And this is why I'm so excited both of you are on the program here, because you're both so well-versed in ethno-nationalist studies, and you're drawing that in, particularly with white nationalism, and now drawing that into finding parallels with BLM and I guess by implication La Raza and all these other ethno-nationalist studies. It seems like we're moving more and more into a world that's either civic nationalist, i.e. Donald Trump, multiple, a plurality of ethnicities all united around a common civic nationalism, like in Brazil or Russia, versus an ethno-nationalism. It looks like the world is splitting up in those two groups. What do you think, Chris?
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly right. And the challenge from CRT in particular is it is a dagger in the heart of civic nationalism, right? Mm. And so then, because it attacks our civic nationalist identity as being a fig leaf for white supremacy and systemic racism. So at its core, the intuition that actually brought me to look at CRT to begin with, starting with looking at white nationalism based on Carroll's work, but then bringing in CRT, the intuition was, well, what happens when you tear down those civic national ideas? And what happens when you attack a group of people on the basis of their racial identity and you attack their identity directly, whether it's whiteness in terms of their racial identity, or whether it's their national identity, calling it systemically racist and so forth. And doesn't that then in turn generate exactly the kind of the ugly kind of politics that you claim to be against, right? And so anyways, that's where my research went into critical race theory. And then what was great was after finishing my dissertation, I was able to connect with Carroll, and it turned out that we were both interested in CRT as well as the broader story of white nationalism and identity politics.
Yeah, it's such a fascinating field, ethno-nationalism, and it's just so ripe. The heuristic, frames of reference it brings to interpret CRT and try to bring some sanity to it is so good. You two have a new book that everyone should know about. Hannah, we should link it down below in our chat section, called Black Eye for America: How Critical Race Theory is Burning Down the House. Love that title. That is cool.
I will hold up the book.
Ah, there you go. There you go. Really. And the foreword was written by one Dr. Ben Carson. So we got a lot of doctors here. This is like a MASH episode here.
I know, doctor.
Normally I feel special on this channel. Not anymore. I'm being pushed out by all these PhDs. What's the backstory to this book? What drew you both to it? What did you want to help your readers understand?
I can tell you that I have been talking about critical race theory probably for about 3 or 4 years. And I've watched cultural Marxism and what has taken place on college and university campuses. And part of my story is I took early retirement in 2017, and I was probably one of the first university professors in America to be canceled because that was before we knew that that I was being canceled, but I would say that I was canceled. And what got me, the reason I felt that this book was important was that there were so many parents asking for help, that my inbox was flooded with parents, teachers, administrators, policymakers trying to understand what was taking place. And at first the book was going to be just a primer to help people understand the concept, and it was going to be even shorter than it is now. We wanted something that would be manageable for people, that would explain what CRT is, where it came from, why it's un-American, why it runs counter to our Constitution and our civil rights laws. And then we wanted strategies, which we have in the book, for people that they can use to fight back, that would be clear. And some of the things that we've done is that we have a glossary, because there's so many terms.
That's true. That's true.
People need to understand those terms. And we have resources listed, including the model school board language for legislatures that are trying to do something at the state level. And so was a need in this country for something that was manageable, that people could understand. And so this book was written not for other scholars, it was written for the American people, something that you could sit down and get through in a couple of hours.
Wow, that's wonderful. Yeah, the glossary, especially when you have sociologists and all their isms and lawyers. If you have sociologists and lawyers together, you're gonna certainly need a glossary. obviously you're both so versed in serious scholarship in ethno-nationalism. But Chris, what connections, what parallels would you see between, say, some of the rhetoric and sentiments and the ideals of white nationalists that you studied with those of, say, some of the more prominent BLM activists?
Oh, that's interesting. So my initial thought was the ethno-state connection. Now, I haven't seen that quite as strong with BLM, but I suspect it's there. I mean, you mentioned La Raza earlier. There were previous groups of Black nationalists who talked about carving out the South. White nationalists famously think that they're going to have the upper Northwest somehow, but Mecha and La Raza obviously have eyes on the Southwest, right? That's been, and that's kind of old news in some ways. That's like a 30-year-old project of theirs. You can go back and you can find, like from the earliest days of the internet, you can find Mecha and La Raza talking about that. I would say that in general, they both reject both sides of, I would call them racial identitarians on the right and left. What they reject at its core is the American tradition and a civic nationalist tradition. But I would push a little bit on the ethno-nationalists. The sharp line, Cone, 1944, right? There's a sharp line between civic and ethnic nationalism, but we should remember that we're not just a bunch of ideas, we're also a people, and we're a people who have a history and a culture. And too often when someone hears someone say that, they think, oh, that's coded language for white nationalism, but it's not. But part of our history and culture is the contributions, in many ways, the outsized contributions of, the 13% of our population who've given us, jazz, blues, rock and roll. I mean, like if you were to actually look at American culture and you were to actually look at our culture as a product, you would find that it's actually certainly of popular culture is disproportionately Black. Right. And so I would say that even within the framework of ethnic and civic, there's a lot of common sort of substance for us to kind of embrace, as a single people. And then obviously what assimilation does is it's always kind of bringing in more people into that common identity. And so I would say, but at its core, I would say it rejects the civic nationalist tradition. Whether you're an identitarian on the right or the left, you can't have this common cross-racial conception of who we are as a people, right?
And Steve, I would say that it really isn't so much ethno-nationalism, it's progressives that have an agenda that's very much rooted in Marxism. They are using Black people and Hispanic people and Asian people to divide our nation. But at the end of the day, it's about their agenda, and they would discard those groups when it becomes useful to do so. So it's not really about the groups. I mean, they have Black folks out there parroting the leftist language, but at the end of the day, they're being used, and some of them know that.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's a great segue into this of defining or describing CRT proper and its relationship to Marxism. This can be a little, pretty bewildering for a lot of people. Can you just kind of give us a basic sense of what CRT is and how it relates to Marxism?
Well, what I want to say is that it is racist. It's a racist, white supremacist ideology that the political left puts forward, because they argue, that in the US that all white people are privileged, that all white people are oppressors, even if they are born in Appalachia, parents never finished the 3rd grade. All Blacks are oppressed, they're victims, even if they're the children of a millionaire or a billionaire. They say the racism is permanent, that whites have to become anti-racist, but no other group. It's presented as if only white people can be racist. And so it's very much rooted in conflict theory with economic Marxism. There was a class dividing it was after capitalism and the workers, divisions between the owners and the workers. But what they're doing with critical race theory is dividing people along racial and ethnic lines in a way that there can never be any racial reconciliation that comes out of critical race theory, because it's all about dividing. And it's so racist because it believes that racial and ethnic minorities cannot compete on the same standards as more superior white people. So the only way you can get an equal result is by lowering the standards. And so they would, they're doing it, getting rid of advanced placement courses. They're saying that math is racist and that teachers should not demand correct answers from racial and ethnic minorities. And they are removing standards for graduation, and they're doing it at the college level as well as K through 12. They're also resegregating America. And when you think about the progressives, they're Democrats for the most part. And the Democrats have always been, the party of segregation. They've always been white supremacists. And so what I see is the same old white supremacy being put forth. But unfortunately, the rest of the country, they seem to have lost their minds because they're not standing up for the civil rights laws or the Constitution. They find it easier to go along with the mob rather than to stand on principles and values.
Wow. Wow. So in other words, the sort of the proletariat bourgeois divide of class has now been replaced with color. It's been replaced with ethnicity and culture, right? The cultural Marxism as opposed to a class-based and economic Marxism, and we're seeing now it being used to, well, as you're saying, and quite literally in this book, burning down the house. It is. Wow, what an interview. And there's just so much more. If you want to hear more of this Q&A, as well as actually becoming a live participant and asking your very own questions to the movers and shakers of the conservative movement all over the world, then you need to join our Insiders Club by simply clicking on the link below. Every week, you're going to have special access to some of your favorite conservatives across the globe, and you're going to love interacting daily with thousands of your fellow conservatives on our group chat and posting platforms. So make sure to click on that link below and join our Insiders Club and get your backstage pass to the worldwide conservative movement today.